Okay, good morning. We are back on the Ribbon Cut podcast. I'm Susan Donkers and my co-host, Charles Hauser.
Good morning. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
It's great to be back.
I'm so pleased. We were just chatting to warm up before the episode, and I can really feel my engine turning back on to get after it for 2026.
Me too.
It's really nice to be back.
Me too. I am ready. Happy to be here, back on the Ribbon Cut, and we've got a great guest today.
Yes.
We've got Ken Poole, who's the CEO and president for the Center of Regional Economic Competitiveness. Ken is in Arlington, Virginia. Welcome, Ken. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Good.
And I'm trying to get it back together myself. Looking forward to the new year.
Well, Ken, tell us about yourself. How did you get to where you are today? Give us your little story.
Okay. Short version is I started up the Center for Regional Economic Competitiveness, CREC, as we say for short, back in January 1, 2000. So this is an anniversary date about now. Every year, the new year is the beginning of a new year for our organization.
Congratulations.
And we started out basically as an organization to support a group at that time called the ACRA, the American Chamber of Commerce Researchers Association. It's since changed its name to the Council for Community and Economic Research. But we started out as an organization that was really designed to be supporting folks in the economic development field to try to encourage greater use of data as a tool to drive decision-making. At that time, we talked about data, but we really didn't use it very frequently. And it's been kind of a theme throughout my entire career in the economic development field, which dates back to the 1980s. Don't want to go back that far just yet, but the main point is since that time we've also adopted 5 other membership networks, which we may talk a little bit more about later on, all in the sort of economic development, workforce development, and data related arenas. Which are really around trying to build stronger systems to support our understanding of market intelligence as we do economic development, workforce development, and even promoting higher ed that's more demand driven.
Cool.
So, Ken, you and I met in May 2025 out in Sacramento, California at the C2ER. I believe it's the annual meeting, the big annual event. Can you tell us 2 things? One, your role at CREC, and then secondly, at an event like C2ER, what type of role do you play there?
Okay, so we are a little bit of an interesting anomaly in that what we do is we are a research and technical assistance organization, CREC in this case, nonprofit that is really focused around sort of providing information and insights for folks in the economic development field. And as part of that work, we manage these 6 different membership associations. So you might think of us as, to some degree, an association management organization. That's probably about 1/3 of our business. Mm-hmm. And the other 2/3 is actually doing the sort of research, technical assistance, capacity building work for economic development and workforce development organizations. So I serve as the titular executive director for all 6 of those membership networks, C2ER being the first of those. Mm-hmm. And also my job is to help sort of provide guidance and direction for each of those membership groups, and also to build interconnections across those groups so they learn and build off of one another. So you may be a member of one of those 6 networks, but the idea is you create value from all 6 of them in terms of the work that you do. And the other groups, just very quickly, are the Labor Market Information Institute, which is a network of folks who work in state labor market shops, building the data around employment and unemployment that you rely on. We also manage the projections managing partnerships. Those are the folks who are doing employment projections at the state and local level. Mm-hmm. We also manage the State Economic Development Executives Network, which are the commerce secretaries or equivalent in all of the 50 states, the Development District Association of Appalachia, which are the economic development districts who work in the counties in the Appalachian region and work collaboratively with the Appalachian Regional Commission.
Yep.
And then the final group is the University Economic Development Association, which is a network of folks who work in universities focused on trying to build the capacity of those universities to support their economic development missions.
Interesting.
So you can see they're all kind of related to one another in many ways.
Absolutely. So will the CREC actually get down to the level of helping the economic development organizations land deals, or you're supplying them the information to help them land deals? Is that more accurate?
We're providing the support infrastructure. So, for example, if let's say a chamber that one of your listeners is working with is trying to provide information about what are the property sites or the employment information or a lot of other economic characteristics of a community. We're supporting those folks who are working directly with the deal makers. So they might be responding to RFIs, and what we're trying to do is make sure they have the best and most current available data. We're also trying to make sure that the public data system that everybody relies on is working and functioning effectively. Mm-hmm. And you've heard a lot about, for example, the issues around the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That's an area that we're very much directly involved in terms of advocacy for better data, for better investment in those data. So we're kind of like behind the scenes supporting the people who are supporting your listeners.
Got it.
So we're kind of the next step along the way. But a big part of also the work that we're doing is also helping them with building strategies aware in terms of what kinds of incentives they ought to be offering, what kinds of investments ought they to be making to improve their communities. That's a big part of the research and technical assistance work that we're doing as well.
So I've got two follow-ups to that, Ken. One's on the labor side, so the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the LMI side, and then the other one's on the incentives. So on the labor side, can you share any insights with the audience of what you saw this autumn and if there's any investments or modifications being made to BLS or LMI that you're advocating for?
Yeah, so one of my side gigs is I serve on a group called the Friends of BLS. I'm on the executive committee of that group. And it's essentially a group that is actually paying pretty close attention to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the availability of data. So I actually know a lot of the inside sort of story there. And the challenge, of course, is that public data oftentimes is historical in its characteristics. And we are suffering from 20 years of disinvestment in the public data systems. And I won't say complete disinvestment. It's been like benign neglect is probably a better way to think about it. Mm-hmm. And as a consequence, we're getting to situations where we've got a couple things that are happening. One is that the resources available to collect data have not kept up with the needs of the demand for data that we now have that we didn't have in the past. And the second piece of this is that we as people who provide data to data collectors, individuals, are becoming more and more skeptical about providing our information because we don't know how it's being used. And so there's a whole issue around trust in data. So the big issue in the fall, of course, related to a couple things. One is sort of bad news resulting in sort of consequences for the agency that one could argue wasn't really fair to the individuals, but they sort of suffered the consequences of years of that benign neglect. And then the second part of it is, during the shutdown, we weren't collecting data. So now we're in a situation where we're flying a bit blind on some things. We're now sort of turning to a lot of private data sources that haven't necessarily been fully tested. And so we're in a little bit of a wild, wild west in terms of the public data, the data systems, and particularly the public data systems. And so I will say that it really is important for us, all of us as consumers of of employment data and economic data more generally, because the same problem is not just true of BLS, it's also true of Census Bureau and the Bureau of Economic Analysis, who are two other big partners that we work collaboratively with, that they've lost a lot of their staff because of staff cuts over the past year. And they've also been asked to provide more and more very localized granular data. And they're restricted by law from providing data that reveals privacy. And in this day of age of AI and nefarious characters, it's very easy to translate data to reveal private information.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're in sort of this environment of this tension that's going on. So I want to sort of reassure folks that I think the folks who are running those data systems are trying their best to walk this fine line, but they do really need our support.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to make that point. So that's on the side of the data systems, and I could talk about that all day, and you probably don't have time to do that. And I'd be happy to.
Well, and we
more.
might circle back to it from the standpoint of, or maybe after this podcast, of how might we support them on a very tactical level.
Yep.
I think that's some of the things that our audience would like to know. There's of course advocacy, but if there's something more tactical that you would recommend.
Part of the challenge, of course, is that a lot of the federal data systems were set up. Actually, their primary audience is Congress and the Council for Economic Advisors. So they're national data systems. They're designed to answer questions to support the Federal Reserve. Yet, we as economic developers really care about it because we're doing a lot of work at the state, local, regional level.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have an interest in this data at that level. Well, the principal federal economic indicators, which are by law require what these agencies are required to do, are their primary focus. And they've been creating these other data sets that we're become so used to, based on, basically aggregating and building up these data systems to support the development of those PFDIs. And but they're not funded necessarily to do this work. And so when funding becomes tighter, the first things that get cut are the things that we care about the most.
Yeah.
Because they're not required by law necessarily. And oftentimes it takes a lot of time for them to do this, and they need to be focusing on the stuff that they have they have to get out.
Mm-hmm.
And add into that, a third of the senior leaders at BLS have left since last year. 1/3.
Wow, that
and
is incredible.
20% of their staff is down 20%. So you have an agency, and this it's very similar situation over at Census and BEA as well. This is all part of the DOGE cuts. Yep. And the sort of a lot of the other and the sort of encouragement of people to leave federal service in 2025.
Yeah.
And so what you have is suddenly there are programs, for example, the Employment Projections Program at Bureau of Labor Statistics, where most of the people who ran it are gone, and there's like nobody left to do it. So, part of the challenge here is we got to get some of those positions filled.
Mm-hmm.
But more importantly, we got to recognize that these are things that we value, and we have to say something, because it's not like there's folks out there whose job is to be an advocate for BLS. It's it's become
part of the fabric of how we work in this profession, and you take it for granted. It's a foundational element. It's one of the first things you learn in the first week, that there's these public data sources that you can rely on. And so no one is used to having to step into that role of being an advocate for the tools they use to do their jobs.
That's true. And the folks who do work with it most are those researchers, the C2ER folks that we've talked about, who tend to be junior level people or mid-level people in their organizations. They don't have really a lot of clout in terms of determining what the advocacy agenda is for their organizations. And so it tends not to get the kind of profile that it needs. So this is, I think, one of the reasons why it's really important, I think, particularly for private sector folks, to really reinforce this. And even organizations who are themselves data providers, you will hear, like CATS, for example. I've had a number of conversations. I'll pick on them, but other groups, other private sector vendors who create data or support data, recognize, one, that they build their stuff on top of federal data, and they use it for benchmarking to make sure that what they're doing is accurate. And so their whole business model relies on these data systems. So it's a really critical part of the work that we do. And it's one of these things where it's gotten very little attention, and suddenly it's gotten a lot of attention this past year. And the worst of it is the attention it's getting is a questioning of the trust that we have in this gold standard data. It's really focused around, can you really trust it? And the data system isn't perfect, even in the best of possible worlds. And there are lots of things that we could do to make it better, not the least of which is to try to get it more forward thinking. But at the same time, if we're starting to not trust the foundational stuff, it makes it very difficult for us to all trust in the decisions that we're making, because it affects markets. It affects the stock market. It affects the investments that companies are making.
Sure. Inflows and outflows of investments, hiring decisions, investment decisions locally and regionally. You're making me think about, there's another organization in Arlington, the Association of Civil Engineers. And I don't know if they still do this, but for a long time, I remember reading their infrastructure report where they would grade our ports and our bridges. And for a long time, we got a D-. I remember that in terms of, hey, we have such critical infrastructure across the country and it needs to be maintained and upkept. And those types of infrastructure reports are what administrations then use to go out and get funding to then improve the infrastructure. So from a data side, you're making me think about, well, how might we all act differently if instead of not trusting the people who are trying to run these systems, if instead we classified them as critical infrastructure to how we run the investments into our country? And if we classified them as critical infrastructure, then how might people start looking at them differently to invest into them? Right. And I think that, with all of the buildup of the data infrastructure with AI, I'm wondering how we could influence that conversation.
Well, and our
audience as well.
Yeah, there have been a lot of reform efforts around trying to improve the productivity of how we collect data. The other thing is a lot of this data relies on surveys. And when's the last time you answered a phone call from someone you didn't know?
Yeah.
Right. So surveys are harder and harder to get people to respond to. So increasingly, one is obviously you continue to try to get response rates. And so you at the same time that you have initiatives in Congress saying, well, census can't call people more than twice to get a response. And yet we need the census data, particularly the decennial census, because that is the sort of foundation for a lot of the work that we do. But at the same time, we also need to figure out how to use the sort of vast trove of administrative data that we have to help inform that. And there are initiatives around trying to move that forward, but those have been underfunded or not funded at the same time that it's getting harder and harder to collect data the way we have. So there are some reforms and some refinements that we could make to our data systems, but we do have to value it in a way that we haven't before. So I'm not sure if that's what you wanted to talk about today, but that's one of my soapboxes this year.
Well, I think it's an excellent conversation because I think this is the audience that does value it. Right? The economic developers who are replying to site selection opportunities and the site selection professionals who are using the data to make billion-dollar decisions, this is the audience that does value that information. And so meeting someone like you and being aware of your organization, I think will give people hope that there are organizations and frameworks that are working on these types of challenges.
And I would love for, sort of an action item for folks who are listening is to help get involved by telling us stories about how you are making the decision, how valuable these data are and how you are making decisions about this. Because what I have found is most of the people who are in this space historically have been on the human services and the social services sort of side of the equation. Mm-hmm. There haven't been a lot of folks who have been actively engaged in this, focused around sort of the economic issues that we're talking, economic development issues. And so oftentimes people turn to me as being a representative of the economic development community. And I'm like, well, I'm a very small sliver of that. And it would be great if we could get a much larger share of our network expressing not only to me, but also to the leadership in their communities, how important this information is, how it's helping them to make decisions, how it's triggering choices. Because I think until folks in Congress hear this, folks in the administration hear this, we're still going to sort of continue to struggle because, you get into these conversations about, do I spend money on the Bureau of Labor Statistics or do I spend money on cancer research? That's the kind of conversations we're in.
Yeah.
And, that's a hard one to make.
Wow.
Hard decision
really
to make, but we should be spending money on both. We should be investing in both.
Right. Well, and the choice of words, right? So should we be investing money in the Bureau of Labor Statistics? If you were to ask me, I would say yes, because you're investing money in the site selection profession, which means you're investing money in economic development, which means you're investing money in jobs, right?
Yeah,
and so if you follow that track back, then it's an easy yes. But I could understand that if you're not thinking about it through that lens, you might just be looking at it as just another data system.
Well, and I actually liken it to you get on an airplane and we talk about and think about the safety of an airplane, right? But what if that little instrumentation panel didn't have very good data in it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Where are you flying to? Will you ever get off the ground? So, to some degree, data is the driver. It is the oil that moves our economy forward because it's helping people make decisions. When in periods of uncertainty, as we saw this past year, in periods of uncertainty, people don't invest.
Yes.
They sit on the sidelines.
Mm-hmm.
And when we have challenges in our data systems, that's the result. And so it's really important for us to have these data, these insights, these tools available to us. And again, I want to sort of harken back to the original idea when we created these data systems was to help the Federal Reserve, to help Congress. We talk about national unemployment rates. But as someone once said, a national unemployment rate is about as valuable as a national temperature. We really need to know what's going on in our communities, in our regions, to really understand what's happening in our economy, particularly in an economy as large as the U.S.
Yeah.
I'm going to repeat that quote. That's a great one. Let's switch over to incentives. As just another very important tool in the toolkit of an economic developer, and also a very important negotiating stance for a site selection professional. Incentives are often used as a way to make communities and sites comparable, and to connect those communities and sites to investment that they really need to land a specific type of industry sector. It levels everybody up so that multiple locations can be comparable. So when you talk to communities about incentives, what tools is CREC and the professional associations that you manage, what tools are they using? Are they keeping track of databases nationwide? Are they doing, audits? Can you shed some light on the resources there?
Yeah. So the area that we've sort of decided to focus in on is trying to sort of create some visibility around what incentives are out there. And I started this work in the 90s, actually, and really doubled down on it about 20 years ago in building the incentives database, the state business incentives database. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but if you're not, it's worth taking a look at. We actually worked with Select USA to make it available for foreign investors to be able to access. And what it basically is a profile of the different incentive programs that states have. And just to give you a flavor, I did a report on this in the late 90s, in which we had about 940 state incentive programs in there. Today, I think that number is about 2,400.
Wow.
The challenge, I would say, is that we tend to create an incentive for everything without thinking about the strategy. And oftentimes, once we get an incentive on the book, we don't sort of back off on it ever. That's on the public policy side. And so they stick around even though they're not really valuable anymore. I try to advise, because we work largely on the public side, I try to advise our public folks that if you're going to have an incentive program, have it with intention. All right. And stop spreading peanut butter really thin, because small incentives don't matter really. And quite frequently, and I would say this to, if you got some private sector folks behind the door and not being quoted, they would admit this as well, that the reality is often comes down to the economics of where they need to be, the characteristics of the community they're looking at, the quality of the workforce that's available. And so a lot of those are really sort of basic foundational investments that demonstrate a community as successful. Now, there might be some places where you got two fairly equal places and they really need something that makes the difference. But I would argue most of the time, those aren't really the difference makers. They're just sweeteners.
Yeah.
What I would say, though, is I say that with the recognition that there are times when you got to go big or go home. And we talked a bit about sort of my history in economic development around, I recall the big investments around Mercedes and BMW in the South, where basically Alabama and South Carolina decided they wanted to get into the auto game and they needed to go big. And they got criticized dramatically for those incentives. But they were making a decision that they needed to transform their economy. When incentives are done with that in mind, that is something very different than an incentive that's trying to make a minor, less than 1% difference in the total value of a particular investment. However, I will say there are times when incentives are really valuable in the sense of, for example, they're designed to really help increase the talent pool,
yes,
improve the talent pool in a community. So the training incentives. If you start digging into a lot of the incentive packages, when you start sort of factoring them out, a lot of it, when you look at the numbers, they're investments in infrastructure that are, yes, they're needed for that particular project, but they're valuable for making a place available to a whole bunch of other potential future investors, or training investments that are designed to improve human capital. And in some cases, it may very well be they're made available to reduce the cost of capital to make an investment possible, but might not have otherwise been possible. But generally speaking, what happens is we'll get an incentive put in place, and then suddenly you can't get rid of it ever, even if after a community's changed its priorities and focusing in a different way. What I would also say on this incentive is and this is my advice to communities in particular, is don't try to incentivize everything. Incentivize the stuff that really matters to you.
Yeah.
Incentivize something that might change the nature of your economy, that will have huge impact on your community. But, recognize that if you're trying to battle and if you're trying to sort of compete in every project with incentives, you're probably not using your incentives strategically.
And when communities then reach out to you to talk about incentives, are they asking to be benchmarked against other communities that are like them? Or are they asking for advice of, hey, this is our new strategy. We've looked ahead at the next 10 to 20 to 30 years of our community, and these are our priorities. How might you help us refine our incentives to match our priorities?
Yeah, and I think that the ones that are looking strategically are really focused on that. How do we take a look at big? It tends to be there's one or two really important incentives that they have, and then they have a bunch of other stuff. And the really important incentives are the ones that they often are trying to take a look at is how do we tweak these to make them help them reflect where we want to take our local economy or our regional economy or our state. And how do we make this more valuable to the types of clusters of companies that we're trying to encourage to invest here?
Mm-hmm.
Or how do we try to help the ones that we have grow to scale?
That's what I was thinking
So
for
it's-
retention
Yeah.
and growth.
It's quite frequently in that space. If but a community that's just throwing out an incentive just to throw out an incentive, it really has to be meaningful to the community and make meaningful change.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, they're
just
spending a lot of
another-
money and it's really it's not doing economic development. Yeah, you're creating some economic activity, but it's not actually changing your community, which is what I think economic development should be about.
Well, and that's we were talking about it at the end of last year about the quality versus quantity,
Mm-hmm.
and that's another example of that, right? Of being
Right.
hyper focused.
Yes.
And so, Charles, one of the things you and I were talking about yesterday is as we look forward at 2026,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm curious, some things that we're doing at Strata Platforms and some things you're doing at CREC where we might overlap. And so one of the things we were talking about is the upcoming C2ER event. And Ken, you said that's going to be in Memphis this year.
That's correct. In June
And-
at the Peabody. So you can come visit the Ducks.
There you go. That'd be great. I love the Ducks.
I've not been to the Peabody.
Oh, it's wonderful. Wonderful.
It's a thing.
Yeah, it's a thing. That's one way to put it. Well, Ken, we appreciate you being here, and we've taken a lot of your time, and thank you very much.
Well, I
for
appreciated
joining
the
us.
opportunity to chat with you, and happy to chat more. I get on my soapbox pretty easily, so my apologies if I did. But these are things that we live and breathe here at CREC. We want to continue to be supportive of the community that we're involved with, and support not only the economic development and workforce development leaders in our communities, but also the investors who are actually making that difference for those communities.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Ken, I couldn't think of two more important topics to talk about as we start 2026. Foundational data and incentives are two of the core pillars of many, right, in site selection, but that's definitely two that are a part of almost every project. And so I think the audience will really appreciate knowing that CREC exists, and go to the website and look at the professional associations there. And
Yep.
there's abundant opportunity to get involved in any of these associations that
Absolutely.
someone from our audience might care about.
Absolutely. And we do collaborate pretty closely with other economic development groups across because there's a lot of work to be done in this space. And
Yeah.
We've really sort of honed in on these issues of data and the issues of the connection between economic development, workforce development, and higher education as being kind of a nexus of where you can create new stuff in your community.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been the sort of area of emphasis for us. And also working a lot with rural areas with manufacturing, particularly advanced manufacturing and the workforce skill requirements that are needed there.
Yeah.
We know that there's a desperate need for workers. Often it's not a body need right now. It's often right now it's really more of a skill requirement.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to help the folks who are providing and upgrading those skills to create the kinds of opportunity for people to get into the work that will help drive economic progress for those communities.
Well, we're looking forward to talking to you again, especially around, I would love our next conversation to really be focused on the university economic development.
Yes.
I think there's a lot more to discuss there. So thank you for joining us this morning, and we wish you a
Terrific.
fantastic year.
And I'm sure
Thanks
we'll
so
see you
much.
on the road sometime in 2026.
Absolutely.
Thank
See
you,
you
Ken.
in Memphis.
Yes, sounds good. Thank you very much.